Is Trump really preparing for war? And what do we actually know about Iran's nuclear weapons? The US, Iran, Israel, Palestine, Ukraine, Russia. For the past 4 years, the world has entered a dangerous peak state where conflicts that have arisen at different times over decades now seem to have reached their final phase. One of the most dangerous and ideological conflicts is the confrontation between the US as Israel's most important partner and Iran, the main existential adversary of the European state. And here it should be added that amid all this, the main subject of fierce fighting and even one could say battles and shelling, as was the case in the summer of 25, are Tehran's plans to develop nuclear weapons. Washington is firmly opposed to even discussing such an initiative, which is why there are already calls within Trump's circle to destroy the Ayatollah's regime. Based on the latest assessments coming out of Washington, right now, it is more vulnerable and weaker than it has ever been in the past. And the underlying justification and potential reason for launching a US military campaign continues to remain fundamentally unchanged. Iran continues to develop its nuclear weapons capabilities. So the main question arises, what will happen next? And are the United States of America ready for such an open confrontation and, well, possibly even for the destruction of Iran? Hello, everyone. My name is Anastasia Husarieva. While you're liking this video, which I really hope you are, subscribing to our channel and leaving comments, I'll try to tell you everything our editorial team has managed to find out so far and put together, so that you stay informed about what's happening. So I'll provide the information, and in return, you give us your subscription and likes. According to the British publication, The Telegraph, Tehran is making covert attempts to restore its nuclear facilities after the American airstrikes that took place in June 2025. This primarily concerns the complexes in Isfahan and Natanz. Satellite images have captured the construction of new roofs over already destroyed buildings. This indicates the resumption of work at sites that were previously damaged as a result of American bombings. And with all this, by the way, you can now see these satellite images on your screens, which confirm the information. Experts cited by the publication believe that such construction activity may indicate attempts by Iranian specialists to restore key elements of the nuclear infrastructure to operation. It is assumed that some of the equipment or materials may have survived the strikes and were not detected by either Israeli or American intelligence. At the same time, this does not involve public or demonstrative actions. On the contrary, the restoration is being carried out in a rather secretive manner. Activity at the sites, according to satellite data, has been ongoing since early December. This current period, as you are likely well aware, and I am certain that you have been following this developing story, has recently become very tense for the nation of Iran, due to the widespread civil protests taking place there. Now, we will discuss all of these events in detail with you. Anti-government protests triggered by economic hardships and social discontent. At the same time, Tehran was facing new threats of possible military action from the United States, which created an additional backdrop of tension in the country, a tension that, according to preliminary assessments, still persists. Work at nuclear facilities intensified precisely at the beginning of December 2025, when internal protests coincided with sharp statements from US President Donald Trump about his readiness to use force. Against this backdrop, analysts believe that the Iranian leadership may have concluded that it was necessary to accelerate the restoration of capabilities lost earlier. Well, after the so-called 12-day war ended, Iran, as noted in several reports, focused primarily on restoring and expanding its arsenal of ballistic missiles. This aspect remains one of the key irritants in relations with Washington. The United States insists that any agreements with Tehran must include not only the cessation of uranium enrichment, but also restrictions on the entire missile program as a whole. In turn, according to the conditions put forward by the American side, the Iranian authorities must destroy warheads capable of reaching Israeli territory, as well as abandon support for regional allies, in particular Hamas in the Gaza Strip, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and the Houthi rebels in Yemen. However, Tehran is not showing any willingness to accept these demands. On the contrary, the Iranian leadership is increasingly taking a hardline and rather belligerent stance. In Tehran, they declared their readiness for war and emphasized that they will respond to any new attack. It is also important to add some crucial information here that specifically concerns the protests. In June, right after the American strikes on nuclear facilities, Iran limited itself to a symbolic response, a strike on a US base in Qatar. Now, however, some analysts believe that the Iranian authorities may have concluded that such restraint was a mistake on their part. And meanwhile, on February 5th, the President of the United States of America, Donald Fredovich Trump, whom you can see on your screens right now, publicly stated that Iran might attempt to resume its nuclear program after the airstrikes carried out by the US and Israel last year. This became known from an interview the head of the White House gave to CBS News. It was Trump himself who, in June, gave the order to strike Iranian nuclear facilities, emphasizing at the time that the actions of the US were of a preventive nature. During the interview, the American president did not rule out the possibility of new military actions, which in particular would concern, of course, Iran, as we understand. In response to the journalist's question about whether the supreme leader of Iran should be worried, Trump stated that he should be very worried. He also added that Tehran is currently negotiating with Washington, and according to the US president, he has heard about Iran's attempts to restart its nuclear project, although he did not provide any specific details. Trump also strongly emphasized and made it clear that if active nuclear activity is resumed, the United States stands fully prepared and ready to employ military force once again. Already on February 5th, it also became known, particularly from publications in several media outlets, one of which reported that the US and Iran had agreed to hold talks on Friday, February 6th, in the capital of Oman, Muscat. This was reported by the Reuters news agency. At the same time, the parties have not yet agreed on the agenda for this upcoming meeting. According to the agency, the Iranian side insists on discussing only the nuclear program, while Washington seeks to include a broader range of issues in the negotiations. The United States is seeking to address issues related to Iranian ballistic missiles and regional security. This concerns Tehran's support for armed groups in the region and the threats that, according to Washington, these programs pose to US allies. Iran, for its part, emphasizes that any attempts to expand the agenda could jeopardize the very existence of these negotiations. After Donald Trump's statements about a possible military scenario by the United States, that is, about the possibility of a force-based scenario, the US has increased its military presence in the Middle East. At the same time, Tehran expresses concerns that a new escalation could seriously destabilize the internal situation in the country, which has already been weakened by protests and economic problems. It is expected that the negotiations on the part of the United States of America will involve negotiators known to us, including Jared Kushner and President Donald Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff. According to reports, the Iranian delegation will be headed by Iran's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Abbas Araghchi. At the same time, the positions of the parties on key issues remain fundamentally different. The United States Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, previously stated that the negotiations should cover not only Iran's nuclear program, but also the range of ballistic missiles, support for regional armaments, armed groups, as well as issues of human rights compliance. In response, Tehran emphasized that the missile program is not subject to discussion and that setting preconditions could derail the negotiation process itself and, accordingly, any prospects for reaching agreements. In turn, it was reported back on February 4th that negotiations between the US and Iran might not take place due to changes in conditions on the part of Tehran. This was reported by Axios, citing journalist Barak Ravid. According to his information, the Donald Trump administration refused to grant Iran's request to move the meeting from Turkey to Oman and to limit it exclusively to nuclear issues. American officials noted that initially the parties agreed to meet in Istanbul in two formats: direct negotiations on the nuclear deal and multilateral consultations on a broader range of issues. Among these were the Iranian missile program, support for proxy groups, and human rights violations during the harsh suppression of protests. Washington emphasized that they are ready to meet as soon as possible if Tehran agrees to return to the original format. And regarding the claim that Iran is currently at its weakest, the escalation of confrontation between Iran and the United States is happening against the backdrop of the brutal suppression of protests within the country. Both sides have already resorted to the use of force. It should be noted here that As reported by Reuters, an American fighter jet, specifically an F-35C, shot down an Iranian drone that was heading toward the U.S. Navy aircraft carrier Abraham Lincoln in the Arabian Sea. Additional tension was created by incidents involving Iranian drones and warships in the Persian Gulf. At the international level, pressure on Tehran increased after European Union countries and Ukraine in particular recognized the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organization. In response, Iran declared the armed forces of European Union countries to be terrorist organizations. Against this backdrop, the discussion around Iran's nuclear program gained new momentum. And according to data provided in particular by American intelligence regarding the protests taking place in Iran, the mass protests that erupted at the end of last year have shaken certain elements of the Iranian system of power. The demonstrations have spread even to regions that were previously considered strongholds of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Right now, you can see footage of how these protests were taking place. And despite the fact that the protests were suppressed, intelligence reports emphasize that Iran's economy remains very weak, and economic difficulties have become one of the key reasons for social discontent. The harsh repressions carried out by the authorities have further deepened the alienation of a significant part of the population from the ruling regime. That was the information as of now. We will continue to monitor the situation in the Middle East and the relations between Iran and the United States of America. I kindly ask you to like and subscribe, and I promise to keep you updated on all the most important events happening in the world. So take care of yourselves, wash your hands with soap. See you in the next broadcast. Bye-bye, everyone.